Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Michael Carrico. Everybody calls me Rico. And I have been the data science lead at 8451 for about 3 years now. Before that, I was a data scientist, I was an analyst, I was a developer. And in my former life, I was actually an electrical and a computer engineer. And that's all to tell you that I have no formal background in learning and development. What I am is a lifelong learner and a lifelong hack who just likes to tinker and figure stuff out. And so yeah, that's how I ended up in this role. Now, all of that said, you might be stuck at the fact that I just said I work for a string of numbers, which is actually true. 8451 is named after my hometown of Cincinnati. We are a retail data science, insights, and media company. We help Kroger Company, our CPG partners, agencies, publishers, and affiliates create more personalized and valuable experiences for shoppers across the path to purchase. We do this through data science that is powered by first-party retail data, over 62 million US households, and we get this from our Kroger Plus loyalty cards, and we use that to fuel a more customer-centric journey across 8451 Insights, loyalty marketing, and Kroger Precision Marketing, which is our retail media advertising solution. All right, with all of that official company line out of the way, I've checked my marketing box, and now I want to tell you about a problem that I ran into about 3 years ago. So I took on this role in around 2022, and I inherited a function that had a lot of really good momentum from an L&D perspective. We had a skill taxonomy, we had a self-rating system that we called our data science DNA. We had a really robust onboarding program for cohorts of new grads twice a year. And so I wanted to build on this. I said that our data science DNA needed a refresh, which needed a refresh of our skill taxonomy and those ratings. And alongside that, we needed to refresh some of that new hire training. And so I focused on what I thought was that foundational item for that first year. As part of that first year, we asked everyone who was rating their skills to flag a few focus skills. What did they want to learn? What was their current proficiency? Where should we focus our efforts? And so you can see some of those stats on the board. I think some of those skills are probably very familiar to a lot of people in this room: Python, PySpark, Power BI, Databricks. And so we set about making trainings based on those. So we partnered with some of our subject matter experts, some of whom are actually here today, and they helped us build out these trainings. And we rolled these out with an if you build it, they will come mentality. So we actually used that data to target communications to those learners, and we said, you asked for it, you've got it, here's your training. And then we measured engagement in those. And unfortunately, what we saw was that of the 50 data scientists who flagged PySpark and Apache Spark as a focus skill, 21 of them didn't finish a single pathway, or 30 of them didn't finish, 21 never even started one, which was a little discouraging, especially for all of the effort that we put in, all of the intentionality behind it. And so we went back to the drawing board. We said, okay, we're going into 2024. What can we do differently? And so we looked out at the OKRs and the strategies of the broader organization, and we talked to our learners, and we said, tell us why you're not taking these. Is it the content? Is it the asynchronous format? What is it? And they said, I just don't have time. It's not a focus, I'm not incentivized, it's not a priority. And so we took those strategies and those OKRs of the broader organization, and we said, all right, we're gonna actually tie our learning directly to those initiatives. So when we hear I don't have priority or time, we can point to those as the broader priorities of the organization and encourage it that way and get partners within the business to help us drive those through. And so we picked about a dozen in the first year. And I'm gonna highlight 2 of them today that are relevant to Databricks and I think this audience. So one is lowering cloud costs, and the second one is driving data discoverability and governance. And so we wanted to have a lot of intentionality behind how do we support these initiatives with learning so that the people who are being asked to drive these strategies have the resources that they need to do that. And so I want to tell you about the solution first, and then I'll walk you through how we got there. So what we did is we rolled out quarterly curriculums. And we did these every quarter. We themed them. So Q1 we did tech, Q2 we did data, Q3 we did science, Q4 we did insights and ways of working. And we picked badges that laddered into those to make sure that we had a balanced curriculum across the data science, to make sure that we had training that accommodated people from our junior data scientists all the way through our vice presidents. And so in these particular badges, you can see the artifacts that took place. We established a badging program that we called 8451 degrees because longitudes. And you can see here that to support our lowering cloud costs, we introduced 2 of these degrees. One is our Spark mechanic, and this contains several pathways that encourage people on the nuts and bolts of how to tune those things. And the other is Spark Savings Supporter. And this was really targeted more at that leadership level for people to get into FinOps dashboards, how to encourage their team to go through these exercises. So we really wanted to make sure that we had that balanced curriculum. These 2 weren't mutually exclusive. We had plenty of people who took both, and I'll show some testimonials from people who did later. But they were really targeted at different audiences to make sure that we were enabling people across the spectrum within our function. Similarly, for our Data Governator badge, which has a slight rendition of Arnie on it, we built out a progressive learning plan where we identify different personas and we built upon all of the subject, those foundational elements, to go work people through the foundational and durable skills within data governance and observability, all the way through the perishable skills of things like Unity Catalog and what they needed to do to actually see those skills come to fruition. So now I want to walk you through in a bit more detail the process that we used to build those out. So the first thing that we did, you've heard me mention audience. And a really important thing that we did when we were scoping these up was ensure that we built out different personas. We wanted to make sure that we were building these out for the right audience because a lot of what we heard with some of our trainings is they got too technical too fast or they didn't go deep enough. And so we wanted to define those personas to ensure that we were meeting the mark and the learning objectives for these different audiences. And the approach is similar across these 2, but there are some slight nuances in how we did this. For lowering cloud costs, we really wanted to make sure that we were thinking about how people were engaging and lowering cloud costs. Traditionally, we'd fallen into the trap of defining personas based on our functions. This is Spark tuning for engineers. This is Spark tuning for data scientists. This is FinOps for our client line. This is FinOps for product managers. And the risk that that runs is creating duplicative work up front and a bit of a maintenance nightmare on the back end where you can have conflicting information, duplicative information. Your product managers are getting separate information than their data scientists are. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were identifying how people were engaging in these different learning efforts. So for lowering cloud costs, we said there's really 2 main personas who are working in here. We have managers or leaders who are responsible for their team and for managing those cloud costs across their portfolio. And so for them, we really want them to leverage those FinOps dashboards that we've built so they can have those discussions in their team meetings, so they can talk to their teams and monitor those throughout. And then for the developers, we want to get more tactical and show them how they can actually tune some of those Spark jobs to activate on those insights that the managers were seeing. On the other side, on driving data discoverability and governance, this was one where there was a broader range of personas that we thought were necessary for success. And so while my scope and my remit in my role is for data science, one of the things that I've learned in my 11 years at this company is that if you only target that one specific set of individuals without educating the broader set, then your product managers aren't going to prioritize things like migration into Unity Catalog because they don't understand the benefits of doing so. And so what we wanted to do was frame up those personas to bring them along on that journey, articulate those benefits for them. And so as we considered things like data discoverability and governance, we said we need to educate our business users on recognizing and understanding things like data governance and the benefits of that. We need data citizens who can get into data catalogs and for product managers to be able to support their solutions so that they can define different columns and descriptions and all of these different elements. So that's really how they need to interact in this world. We have data consumers who might be like a BI analyst who just needs to read that data and publish it in dashboards, but they don't need the granularity of permissions and writing, where some of our data engineers and our data scientists do. So we're gonna define how to write to it for our data producers. And then we also have some of our administrators, schema owners, who need to manage the data assets for their team, and the platform admins who need to actually have oversight over that whole product. And I think while it is tempting to say that platform admins don't really need to know how to read and write and kind of all of these minutiae out of the catalog, it's important that they understand how their consumers are operating on their product so that they can weigh in on those best practices, as well as understand when they get questions, what resources are available that they can direct their users to. And so we wanted them to get exposure to that exact same curriculum that their consumers do. So when it came time for us to actually curate these pathways, which I will say later, I always say curate, don't create, is one of my mantras. When it came time to curate these pathways, kind of like how we defined personas similarly, we also we curated these in a similar way, but again with some nuances. So for our Lowering Cloud Costs initiative, we had a couple different interactions with Databricks that really helped us move this forward. First, we had an instructor-led training. And this is Mark. I don't know if Mark is around today or in the conference, but he's amazing. If you have a chance to take an ILT with Mark, he makes Spark tuning about as fun as Spark tuning can be, so I would highly encourage him. But we sent a cohort of some of our Spark subject matter experts to that instructor-led training. And we asked them, hey, take what you have, report back how it is, and let us know if we should send more people through it. You know, this is a prepackaged from Databricks. We can use some of our credits. Should we send more people through it? Bring your learnings back. At the same time, we had a technical consultation where some members from Databricks actually came in, evaluated the jobs that we thought needed to be tuned, where cloud costs needed to come down, and they provided some recommendations. Here are the things that we think are most important for 8451 to bring those costs down based on how we're seeing you use Spark. And so after we had these two initiatives, we brought that group back together, and there was a lot of crossover between those two consultations and the training. And we said, all right, what do we need to do to populate everyone? Should we send everyone to that ILT? And ultimately what they said was, based on that technical consultation and how we've seen platform usage, we actually think that there's a subset of that ILT that's most impactful. And they made this Pareto pyramid where they said there's a set of no-code, low-code, high-code tunes that we could roll out, and we really need to focus our effort on training people on those. The rest of it's helpful if you really need to get down in the weeds, but it's overkill for a lot of our tunes. And so what they did is they took the on-demand training out of Databricks Academy that was relevant, so some of the concepts like skew, shuffle, and they worked those into pathways alongside internal documentation on some of those tuning best practices and hands-on exercises where people could get practice tuning on our data, on our queries. And so in taking this approach, it allowed us to amplify the time of those subject matter experts. It was still quite an investment of time from them, but this allowed the rest of our organization not to focus on those lower value items, and it got them hands-on in our data to see that benefit, to see how you could take a query that is originating from one of our internal packages and tune the levers that we have to bring those down. So they could then apply those to their jobs. So it really resonated a lot better through this curated approach. And a similar approach for our data governance. We had a group of a cross-functional adoption team who shepherded people through the adoption of Unity Catalog. and they would partner with people from the organization. And so they saw the stumbles, they saw the different educational elements that those groups needed, and they went out to Databricks Academy, they looked at external sources, and they said, where can we actually leverage some of that to train on those foundational items of what is data governance, what is Unity Catalog, what are the things that we don't need to recreate in-house? And then they focus their attention on our particular implementation of Unity Catalog. So as with most of you, if you have adopted Unity Catalog, I'm sure everyone's setup is a little different. How you define your data domains, how you architect that. And so we wanted to make sure that we were training people on our architecture, on our implementation. And part of that was giving people hands-on exercises in a sandbox that they could do that in. So because Unity Catalog is a migration and an adoption, people have a hard time getting hands-on if they don't have infrastructure stood up. A lot of the people who are going through this training are the very people who will be standing that up. And so the training team took a lot of time in architecting a sandbox, a training environment within our walls that people could do that. So they made an entire training schema, or an entire training catalog, and within their schemas for each of the individual users. And so there was a lot of intentional effort in how they architected that to show all the different functionality of Unity Catalog. And then my role in this, in addition to helping curate a lot of these trainings, was measurement. So one of the things that we wanted to really avoid was kind of what we ran into the year before, where we take all of this effort and all of this time building all this training and it sits on the shelf. And so one of the things that I did was actually use the tools that we were training on to measure these initiatives. And so we did this in a few ways. I actually used Databricks in an internal packaging tool that we support to deploy a package, a Python package, that standardized our training across our training data across our various functions. So I was able to deploy that, and we schedule that in a Databricks job. And we use that to refresh our learning data every week. And data out of that data lake actually feeds Power BI dashboards that are accessible to managers that show their employees' progress against training throughout a quarter. And it also includes a dashboard called a learning transcript for each employee for every quarter that shows all of their learning activity throughout the entire quarter, both within our badging structure and everywhere else within our LXP. I use that same data to feed quarterly readouts to leadership, to the function, and that helps really encourage this culture of learning where we celebrate different people who go through. It encourages competition between teams and between offices. I think the screenshot here is all of our different offices, Cincinnati, Chicago, Portland, home offices, New York. And so we track who's getting the most badges. We have individuals who chase each different badges and all of the different stickers that go along with it. And so all of this measurement feeds a culture of accountability and a culture of learning. And so it sounds like a lot of effort, and it is, but we've seen the results pay off in 2024. And so for lowering cloud costs, we had 233 learners engage in those pathways, which is a stark difference from having over half not engage at all. And in partnering with the FinOps team, I was able to ask them if they could help quantify the impact of people who went through those pathways. How much can we attribute to the people who went through these trainings? And they estimated that we saved $1 million in cloud costs from people who had gone through this learning initiative. Similarly, with driving data discoverability and governance, we saw 193 people engage, and we had 90% platform adoption for our target audience, which was a subset of our organization. But now we have training materials and lessons learned that we can use to apply to the other portion of the organization. We don't have to redo a whole set of synchronous training sessions. We can just send those out because they're on demand, they're asynchronous. In our first year of badging, we had 78% of our data scientists complete at least one of our badges. And so this was, frankly, an adoption rate that I was shocked by, especially when we saw leadership adoption. So we had 78% of our directors and 80% of our vice presidents also complete a badge in the first quarter, which was a drastic change from what we had seen in previous years. But another thing that I'm really proud of is the culture of learning that we're rekindling. So I'm sure, as with many of you, COVID threw a bit of a wrench in L&D. I think prior to the pandemic, when we were all in office, we had a really great learning culture, a lot of in-office trainings and learning groups. And so one of the things that we've been struggling with was how to bring this back, how to rekindle this. And so we supported a lot of our learning efforts with intentional initiatives and incentives to really drive people back. So one of the things that we do, we call Training Day. It's the second Friday of every month. And for that afternoon, we as a company actually have it blocked out. But we feature one of our badges during that time every quarter. And a lot of times, since they are on demand, since they are asynchronous, our trainers literally just fire up a meeting, introduce the pathway, and awkwardly sit quietly on a meeting and just wait to see if people have any questions. And sometimes they just sit there all afternoon and they have a free afternoon to work. Sometimes people will pop in and ask questions, but just by allocating that time, by showing people that there's support, by stating what the focus is, we've seen a drastic increase in the adoption on those days. Similarly, we have learning groups to encourage cohorts of people to go through. So we did a learning group on Spark mechanics, and I actually told them if they finished all of their trainings by a certain date, I would cook them breakfast. And they were probably expecting bagels and donuts, but little did they know that cooking is my other hobby, so I brought an induction burner into the office, and I made them omelets and breakfast fried rice. So they got a pretty nice breakfast out of it. We also have our learners become our own advocates. So during that quarterly readout, we always ask one person to go back to the function and say, what was your favorite training? If each of these trainings, tell everyone why you enjoyed it, what they should learn, and really advocate for other people to take it. So people can hear from their fellow learners why it's impactful, why they should take it. And we hand out awards. So I usually do goofy movie themes for all of my presentations. I'm not a creative person, so it keeps me structured. And that one was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so I actually handed out like face masks and foam weapons to everyone who got one. I don't know that HR was a fan of that, but it's okay. But we give out gift cards and just goofy stuff to celebrate that learning, and it's really just to elevate learning across the organization on a pretty small budget. I mean, L&D doesn't always have the biggest budgets, so it's a good way to stretch that. And so along with turning that enthusiasm into advocacy, these were two of our top badge getters from last year. I think between them, they finished like 10 and 11 badges each. And so I asked them what their favorites were, and Ken actually picked these two. So he highlighted the two-sided approach of the Spark mechanic and the Spark saving supporter and recognized how the approach really supported both sides of it, the measurement as well as the hands-on piece. And Haley recommended the data governator. And this one I thought was especially powerful because she said her team wasn't actually going through migration yet, but she had gone through, she saw the training, and she knew that when her team needed to go through it, she knew where those materials were. She could go through it at that point. And I think that's some of the power that on demand is you raise the awareness of its availability, and then you can deploy it once it's relevant. And so that's a big reason that I'm an advocate for some of the asynchronous training. And one of my recent favorite examples of building a learning culture is actually one of our employees, Jason. Jason's been a Kroger employee for over 35 years. He started in the stores when he was just 16, renting VHS cassettes. He's worked in the 1-hour photo lab, merchandising, store operations, supply chain, and now he's a data scientist at 8451. So 2 quarters ago, we featured a pathway on Introduction to Agentic AI, which I don't know if you all have heard that mentioned a few times at this conference, but I have. And he took it and he said, this was great. I immediately went, I put it into action on a project. I saw some value. I would love to come back and share how I did it so that others can reap those benefits as well. And he asked if he could collaborate on a pathway. I said, absolutely. So He created a pathway on applied examples where he featured his project. He made his notebook available for others to tinker with it. We featured that as a badge in Q1. And I think this is really what makes me excited about a culture of learning. It's learners becoming teachers, it's ideas spurring more ideas, and this really builds that momentum to facilitate a culture of lifelong learning. And so to close, a few takeaways that, I guess, advice from the gray sage L&D guy, but dedicate L&D resources. A lot of times, L&D can feel like this side of desk thing where, hopefully everybody who's a subject matter expert just has time to do this. And don't get me wrong, I count a lot on the time and the efforts of my subject matter experts throughout the business, but I can play that air traffic controller who works back with leadership to identify initiatives, to do the measurement, to bring some of those pathways to fruition so they don't have to mess with LXPs and where to host things and all of that. And having somebody who is a dedicated L&D resource, particularly with some technical background, I think is really helpful and important. Similarly, having systems where you can train and track those is really important. Invest in your systems to do so. Leadership and strategic alignment. This is really what I said, where if just going in and creating stuff without that North Star and tying it to why, I think really presents prioritization challenges, both to get trainer time as well as learner time, and really buy-in from the organization as a whole. When you can show value back to the organization, it goes a long way. External platform partnership. So I mentioned partnering with Catherine and others from Databricks Academy, and being able to work with those really great content partners to be that supplement, to be that source, so you're not making every bit of content that you have. It frees up your subject matter experts from having to create, and it allows you to not just avoid building, but also maintaining all of that content. So find that really great partner. Try to find ways of identifying trainers throughout your business and empower them. So one of the benefits of taking that time to have people self-rate, while there are problems with self-rating, it allowed us to find subject matter experts we wouldn't have found otherwise. So our business is growing. I can't just know everyone in the business. Try to find them and empower them, remove those barriers. And finally, engage your learners. It goes a long way to build that culture, to not just require them to learn. I think requiring builds compliance, it doesn't build culture. And so lead by learning, show people the importance of it, have your leaders engage in it as well to exhibit that behavior. If people see that leaders don't have time to learn, they're going to think that's what is necessary to be a leader in your organization. So encourage your leaders to lead by learning, and ultimately create that learning content that people want to take. I think way too often we require people to take these things, and I would encourage you all not to require people to learn, but inspire them to learn. And with that, I think we are going to take questions. I didn't go too far over. We're going to take questions. So we have a mic runner somewhere. I do have a softball to warm up while we get mic runners going.
Learning journey. As a means to introduce myself, I'm Catherine Carney. I'm responsible for customer enablement at Databricks, as well as the Databricks community. And it is with great customers like 8451 that allow us to really kind of keep growing. As a learning organization, we identify roles that we think would be useful across our portfolio. And then inevitably, if you were at the keynote this morning, you'll learn that Databricks is changing all the time. So we constantly have to maintain our content. And as I say, working with great partners like Carrico and his teams really helps with that. So hopefully you're all on that train too. But by means of a softball, so that folks can get ready for the mic, we'll open it up to Q&A. But I do have some questions if folks are a little bit shy to start with. But Carrico, I'd love to ask you, if someone in the audience is about to start their own upskilling journey, what's one thing you wish you'd known at the start?
So, as you might know, by this point I'm verbose, so I have not one but 5 mantras that I work with in L&D. One is That skill support strategy. So my wife is in strategy, and I try to remind her of this all the time, that strategy without that support structure is not going to come to fruition. And so one of the things that I wish I'd done from a lessons learned perspective is it was tempting to do those foundational items first because that's what we were used to. That's what we'd built on, but it was too big. And so Catherine had, in her talk yesterday, one of her pieces of advice was take the quick win. And I think going after some of those quick wins, going after those ties back to the strategy narrows your scope, and it allows you to realize those wins quicker. So you get those wins and you move forward. Another piece of advice that I heard is thaw the permafrost, which I heard somebody compare middle management to permafrost, where nothing that makes its way from top down can get through, and nothing that comes from the bottom up gets through if middle managers aren't bought in. Where we have seen the greatest success is when we have that supportive middle management layer that is supporting and driving their teams and advocating both up and pushing their teams down below. And so I would highly encourage really partnering with that middle management layer to drive through these initiatives. I think it really pays off. Another item is curate, don't create. I said this earlier. It just makes your life easier to not have to build and maintain all of these things. One is I can't train on standards that don't exist. So very often I have been asked to train on things only to come to find out that we haven't actually defined what it is I'm training yet. And so before you accept an L&D assignment, really make sure that they're ready for you, or else you're going to be spinning your wheels and helping to define those things while you're training on them. And so, yeah, those are, I guess, a few sage words of wisdom.
Very good. Great. I think we're at time, Rico. You filled it all up. Well done. Big round of applause for Rico. Thank you.
Thank you all.